Well, welcome everybody to this adversary emulation for the cloud presentation. We're going to start off with some introductions and then dive into it just in case we haven't met before. And if this is your first time joining a Cyber Live event, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoy it. We try to host about one of these every month or every other month, give or take, and we cover all kinds of different topics. So if you're interested in more conversations like this about cloud security in general, then you can go to cybercybr.com/webinars and you can sign up for upcoming ones or even see past presentations. But today we're going to be focusing on adversary emulation for the cloud. A couple of quick questions I typically always get as we get started, so I like to knock them out of the way right away, is yes, this is going to be a recorded session. Give me about 24 to 48 hours to get this edited. I want to trim it up a little bit, remove issues and things like that. And then I'll upload it to the website and also on YouTube. And I'll send it out to the email that you use to register here. So I'm not going to be spamming you. I'm not going to be sending you a whole bunch of stuff after the fact. I'm literally just going to send you this recording and then I will get rid of your email. So that's really the only reason that I end up using it for that. And then after that, yes, you can also ask questions throughout the presentation. What we usually like to do with these sessions is, because I'm going to take a little bit more of a backseat in this one today, I will keep an eye on the Q&A. And so if you've never used this software before, there's like a little Q&A tab you can click on and you can ask questions there. I'll be able to see it, and Christophe will also be able to see it. And so we can either answer them right away, or we can hold until the very end once we're done with the presentation. Just kind of depends on how much time we have and a couple other factors. But if you have a question, just go ahead and write it down, submit it. You don't have to hold on to it until the very end. And yeah, like Christophe said, I don't know if everybody is able to see. I think that might just be a personal chat, Christophe. I think you may have to submit through Q&A. That might just be between the two of us. But he mentioned go crazy in the Q&A. We will be answering, and I'm sure he would welcome your questions as well. So let's do it. Like I said, we're going to do some quick introductions about both of us. And then after that, we're going to talk about adversary simulation and purple teaming with a tool called Stratus Red Team, which Christophe authored. And same thing with another tool that he more recently launched, I think it was just a few months ago, called Grimoire. And so that's focused a little bit more on detection engineering. So they kind of work together as well as individually. And so we'll be covering both of them today. And then after that, we'll wrap up with in conclusion. So we'll get started with brief introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. Like I said, welcome to this Cyber Live event. I'm the founder and trainer at Cyber, CYBR, where we teach people how to use AWS securely. So we're really focused on AWS security. I have over 8 years of AWS experience, kind of started off more on the development side, developing and deploying backend applications to Amazon Web Services, and then moved a little bit more into cloud architecture, and then finally ended up in cloud security. So I've loved AWS since the moment I've started using it. Yes, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating, but I've really enjoyed working with it, and I've kind of made it my career out of it, which is how much I've enjoyed it. Now, I'm originally from France, which is where the name comes from. And somebody actually commented, I think Brian's in the audience today, but I saw on LinkedIn, he mentioned double the Christophs, double the fun. I wish I'd come up with that tagline. That would have been a better title, honestly, but that's okay. I don't know if you're from France, Christophe, actually. I think you're from Switzerland, right?
No, I'm from France.
Oh, you are from France. Okay, cool. So that kind of explains the two names. I don't typically come across very many Christophs. But anyway, so I'm from France, but I currently reside in Colorado in the United States, and I love hiking and skiing. So if you ever swing by, which, by the way, there's a conference called Forward CloudSec that will be in Denver next year. And so if you end up attending that, I will definitely be there, and I'd love to connect and hang out. So just wanted to mention that there. I'm also a professional hobbyist. I currently make homemade brew, so I love making beers. And prior to that, I was also growing mushrooms, which is a fun little fact. If you want to connect with me, I've got some social handles at the bottom there. They'll come back up at the very end of the presentation as well. But I would love to connect with you, especially on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. All right, that's it about me, though. Take it over, Christophe.
Yes, thank you. Great. So I will share my full screen because we have some demos afterwards. So you should now be able to see. Should I use picture-in-picture mode?
If you launch it, it'll create like another window bubble that just has the video feed in it. So
okay,
it's optional.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
I will do that. Brilliant, perfect. Great. So you should be able to see my slides now. If not, please scream. Great. So my name is Christophe. I work at Datadog, which is a company that does a lot of different things, but also security products since around 3 years ago. And so I do a mix of cloud security and open source there, helping with the products and trying to publish some research as well. As Christophe said, I'm French, as you can hear, and I moved to Switzerland 12 years ago now. So that's basically it. Previously, I've done a few things. So I started actually doing some Java backend development. Then I did a bit of everything from pen testing. I worked in a SOC for a bit. Then I was more on the traditional IT security side. And finally, I was on the cloud security side, which is how I picked up some cloud security and container security experience. This is my socials. I think I have the wrong one for this one. The second one is on Blue Sky, the new fancy social network. Great. So today we're going to talk about two tools that are obviously open source and they are totally unrelated to any commercial offering. So they are on GitHub. First one is called Stratus Red Team. The second one is Grimoire. And we're going to explain how they work. We're going to demo them. We're going to take questions on them. And first, I'm going to give a bit of context on how these tools fit into the broader picture. Christophe, feel free to interrupt me anytime. Do you want to say a few words about this cheat sheet that you have put together?
If you want to go to the URL redirect, it'll take you straight to the image and you can download it and share it. It's just a quick reference guide and it says totally free. So if you're interested, go ahead and download it.
Yeah, it's a great way to get a piece of context about these tools without having to read the full documentation. So thanks for that. I'm very glad that someone else did the work for me. Cool. So where we're going a little bit today, I think we have around maybe 15 minutes of presentation with probably the same of the demos in the meanwhile. And the first thing is, if we are someone who runs a cloud environment, how do we detect bad things? How do we simulate these bad things so that we can make sure our detections are working? And finally, how can we make sure that people who defend these environments can understand and reproduce these things? And the terms that are generally used are these ones. So if we set the stage a little bit in a simpler way, so you have on the left the bad hacker who's trying to hack, to compromise your environment. And on the right, you have, maybe you're a cloud security engineer, a DevOps engineer, someone who's in charge of security, even if he's not in your job title, which is very often the case. And so we're trying to detect this person and we're trying to kick them out, right? That's the general overview. So we used to do that a while ago using indicators of compromise. So these are static lists that are published on different places of things like malicious hashes, malicious IP addresses, things like that. And the idea is that if you see one of them in your environment, you would flag it and you would understand that something is wrong. Now, the main issue with this is that they are very heavy to deal with and they change very quickly. So even if in the context of cloud, we have different things that are more like, cloud account IDs, malicious user agents, or people who use specifically malicious Docker images. So they are not really the same taxonomy, they have the same issues. So across the years, people tend to go from detecting things like hashes and IP addresses to things that are more like behaviors and tools. So this thing is what is called the pyramid of pain. You might have seen it before. It's on probably in every presentation that talks about detection engineering. Hate it, all of it. So when you're at the bottom of this pyramid, you have things that are very easy for defenders to catch, but also very easy for attackers to change. And as you move up, you get to behaviors and tools. And these are things that are harder to detect as a defender, but also much harder to change as an attacker. So it's really useful to try to detect on these. Which brings the question, well, if I'm an attacker, like if I try to detect attackers, I want to know what they are up to, what they are trying to do, and what is their goal, right? So that you can detect them. So there are different models that try to model that. Obviously, there's Mitra attack, which is more originally is more for on-premise stuff, but they have a cloud matrix as well, which in my opinion is not specific enough to the cloud providers, but it's still useful. And so you see every column is one stage of an attack, and every cell is one way that an attacker can attack your environment in this stage. Very similarly, at least in terms of format, so you have the Kubernetes threat matrix for Kubernetes, You have the Azure Threat Matrix that was released in 2022 from Microsoft. And again, it's the same format. At Datadog, we also have an open version of what we call the Cloud Security Atlas. So it's a bunch of basically some attacks that we picked up from our telemetry. And when we find it in enough environments, we write about it. And so if you go to this link, you will see some information about these attacks, how you can detect them, and how you can reproduce them. That's the general idea, which brings us to the term of purple teaming, which is kind of a catch-all word. But I think it's actually a very simple word if you try to simplify it. It means that you want people who defend your environment to be able to attack it as well. So if you think about someone who's trying to secure your door, well, you also want them to be able to lockpick it so they can make sure that what they secured is actually working, right? I think that's the main concept behind purple teaming, even though it's a very catch-all word. And generally, and some people might disagree of how have a different mental model, but generally, I see it as a three-step methodology where you start by reproducing an attack that you want to detect, so you actually trigger it. Then you're going to look at your logs, your metadata, your net flows, whatever you have, whatever product, whatever tool you have. And finally, you say, okay, well, I see this event, this log, this thing. I'm going to write a detection based on that. And you're going to iterate on that to make sure it's working properly. And so in this picture, Stratus Red Team is about knowing which attacks to detect and how to reproduce them easily. And Grimoire, that we'll see next, is more on how do you generate data sets of cloud security logs. That was a lot. So we're going to dive quickly into the demo. But why did we build Stratus Red Team? I think strongly that when you develop a tool, it should be based from a real problem, right? The point is not to make another tool. It should be really, it should solve something that is painful for the community. And for me, at least, and I think for many people, the main issue when trying to reproduce cloud attack techniques was how do we handle the prerequisite infrastructure? So many times when you want to run an attack in a cloud environment, you first need to create some prerequisite infrastructure. For instance, if you want to attack a virtual machine, well, first you need a virtual machine with specific settings. And when you are done, you want to make sure that you have nothing left in your cloud account because you don't want to pay for it and things like that. So let's see a very simple example. So you will see it's already a bit painful. And even though it's a very, very simple attack technique. So the attack is if you want to disable a CloudTrail log, a CloudTrail trail. So in AWS, CloudTrail is the service that will log all of the events that that happen in your environment, and they will log that into JSON files into an S3 bucket. So it's a very popular thing, and many times when an attacker compromises an environment, they will turn it off so that they can fly under the radar. So if we want to test this attack, the first thing we need is a CloudTrail trail, because if we don't have one, we have nothing to stop, right? So we do that. You go to the console, you create your trail. It tells you it needs an S3 bucket. So you say, okay, well, you can create that for me. Then when you have your trail, you can actually reproduce the attack. So you say, okay, stop logging. And at this point, you're good, you reproduce your attack. But the issue here comes when you want to clean it up. So you say, it's easy, there's a delete button. I'm just going to click on that. Then it tells you, okay, all good. I'm going to remove that trail, but you will still have your S3 bucket. I'm not going to touch that. So you are left with an S3 bucket that you're going to pay for indefinitely unless you do something. So you go to the console, you check this box, you say, hey, I want to delete it. Fortunately, it's not empty. You get this error. So you go back to your console, you say, okay, select it, click on empty. Okay, I need to enter permanently delete to empty it. All good. Now it's empty. So finally, you can go back to the console, select your your S3 bucket, and then delete it. Then you need to confirm the bucket name again, etc., etc. But you can see here that for a very, very simple attack technique, there's nothing complex. You basically spent the majority of the time either setting up the prerequisite infrastructure, either complaining about the docs, either trying to clean it up in a way that doesn't mess up your account. And so that's why the main problem that Stratus Red Team is trying to solve. So we released it in early 2022, and I like to call it Atomic Red Team for the cloud because many people know about this tool, Atomic Red Team, which was more focused on Windows. Windows and Linux, like laptops and servers, things like that. So it's kind of the same philosophy, but for the cloud, it's written in Go. And the idea is that you can reproduce a bunch of cloud attacks using only this tool. So you just have the binary, you can install it, and you don't need anything else. And so I'm going to show a little bit how it works and what's the docs behind it. It looks like I'm going to have to authenticate again to my slides. So can you still see my slides well? I mean, my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen. I created a share link. I think that's why it's doing that. So if you refresh, it should fix the link.
Excellent. Excellent. So if you go to the documentation of Stratus Red Team, you see so the usual things. You have the homepage with how to use it, what it solves. There is a comparison with other tools as well, because there are different tools that do kind of the same thing, but not really. And depending on what you're trying to do, it's always interesting to know what else is available and how it compares. Now, the interesting piece is in the attack techniques reference. So you will see that you have a bunch of them here for different platforms. In terms of platforms, there is support for AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Microsoft Entra ID, EKS, and Kubernetes. So let's have a look at one. I'm going to look at S3 ransomware. Right. So on every attack technique, you have a few things. You have a mapping to micro attack. You have a description of how this works. And you have two steps. So the warm-up, which is, zoom in a little bit, which is what prerequisites do we need and what is Stratus Red Team going to do before running the attack. So here we are talking about S3 ransomware. So obviously, the warm-up phase, the prerequisites phase is creating an S3 bucket with a bunch of files, because that's what you would expect to see before running the attack. And then the detonation part, so when you're actually doing the attack, is going to do these things. So list all the objects, delete them, and then upload a ransom note. And then you have different other things that hopefully help you get some more context on where it's used in the wild. So here, we have a few links on people or companies that report S3 ransomware in the wild, the CLI that you can use to reproduce the attack, and then some notes on the detection. So what are the CloudTrail logs look like? Are there any guarded findings that you can use? Things like that. So now let's do a quick demo of this thing. So again, here I'm in my CLI, authenticated to an AWS account, hopefully. And from there, I'm going to be able to use the Stratus Red Team binary, which, as I do that, I'm going to reload the slides, make sure that they are working for afterwards. Cool. So Stratus Red Team, the CLI has a few commands. The one we can use easily is Stratus list, going to give you the same thing as what's in the docs. Then what you can do is Stratus status. So it can tell you, hey, have you detonated this thing before in your cloud account? We can say here that it's cold, so it means it's not ready to be detonated yet. We're going to warm it up. So we do Stratus warm up of this attack technique. And at this point, it's going to do what we see here in the warm-up phase. So creating an S3 bucket and creating some sample files that we can work from. In the meantime, I'm going to open my S3 console. I'm going to wait for a few seconds. And so what's going to happen there is my bucket having, I think, 50-ish files that look legitimate, but are actually just rubbish, and that we're going to be able to ransomware or to simulate a ransomware for using Stratus Red Team. Do you have any relevant questions to that in the chat, Christophe?
No questions in. So if you have questions, go ahead and submit them now, and then we can take a quick break and answer them.
Brilliant. So back to my S3 console, you will see that I have this new bucket now, and I can open it, and I see I have a bunch of files, mostly random stuff with different extensions. So it tries to mimic what legitimate looking S3 bucket might look like. And now I'm at a stage where I have what I need to reproduce the attack. So I can just go back to the docs, copy this CLI, which is just Stratus detonate and the ID of the attack technique. And it's going to simulate the ransomware event. So simulating a ransomware attack. In this case, it's going to list the objects, remove all of them, and remove all the versions as well. As you can see here, uploading a fake ransom note. If we go back to our bucket, we can now see, refresh, that we have no files anymore. We have no versions anymore, and we have instead something that looks very much like a ransom note that hopefully nobody will ever see in their lives. And if we open it, you will see that it's basically telling, hey, this is a ransomware, etc., etc. No, that's good. We have reproduced our attack, so we can maybe go to our SIEM, to our different, I know, whatever we use, try to see how we can detect the attack, see if something blocked it, maybe. We get some alerts, some Slack notifications, whatever. And when we're done, well, only one thing to do is we can just say Stratus cleanup of this attack, and it's going to make sure that everything is clean and we don't have any leftovers. That's basically it for Stratus Red Team. I will say that the prerequisites are implemented with Terraform. So when you do a Stratus warm-up, you can see that it's going to use Terraform to spin up the prerequisites because it's a state that you want. And when you run the attack, it's actually implemented as Go code. So you have these two different things.
It almost seems too easy, to be honest with you. Every time I demo Stratus, I think people expect it's going to take like an hour to set it up and get going. It's super easy to get going with and to actually deploy the attacks and then roll it back, which is one of the things I love about it.
Right. Yeah. And so this, this hopefully makes it easy to install. The command is this one. You can also install it through Homebrew. I will say that one of the trade-offs we had to make is that for it to be self-contained, it has to be a bit less extensible. So if you want to write your own attack techniques, currently you have to contribute directly to the core or you have to fork it. Just to show an example of an attack technique, so that people who might be interested to contribute can see what it looks like. So if we take one that's very simple, so stopping a CloudTrail trail, you will see that you have two files, one for the Terraform prerequisites. Here again, well, we need to create a CloudTrail trail with an S3 bucket. So it's classic Terraform that's doing what you would expect, writing a bucket. And the main Go file basically tells you some metadata about the attack technique. And you have the code that does the detonation using the AWS SDK. So that's quite simple. If you've never used Go, it's a good opportunity to learn it. That's actually how I learned it. So that's just as a side note. Do we have any specific questions about Stratus Red Team at this point?
Great. We had
so
some good questions come through. So we'll go from the top down with the first one here, and I'll go ahead and project it so everybody can see what we're talking about. Okay, so the first question is, do these techniques have any indication as to the cost to warm up and detonate?
So they don't, mostly because the cloud costs are like they change all of the time and they're very, very hard to compute. So if you look at running an EC2 instance that uses an S3 bucket, you have not only the cost of the EC2, but also the data transfer cost, the number of requests to the S3 bucket, everything like that. I will say that generally, what's nice is that the cleanup is done specifically to make it easy to clean it up. From my experience, it's much less likely that you will have some leftover things in your account using something like this, but if you do it manually. There is no indication on the cost. That said, if you look at the Terraform code in each of the attack techniques, you should be able to get an idea. Generally, there's nothing crazy. So there is no attack technique that will spin up tens of EC2 instances with a GPU in it. Whenever something looks very expensive to do, we actually simulate an access denied error. So there's an example for that one, which is detecting an attacker that tries to start a bunch of EC2 instances. Let me find it. And yeah, basically, that would be execution. Launch unusual EC2 instance. So for this one, what we do is we make sure that attacker activity gets denied so that you still get the log, but you don't get billed for something that would be crazy. Hopefully that answers.
I was going to say the same thing. All of these actually that I've tried out, even if they cost a little bit of money, as long as you don't leave it running indefinitely, spin it up, tear it down, you're talking about maybe a couple of dollars, probably even less than that. So it's usually very, very cheap. We have a slide, I think it's number 44. If you want to try out Stratus Red Team for free, we have a lab that you can spin up 100% for free. All you need is a cyber free account. And so you can go to that URL, URL cyber.com/try Stratus, and it will redirect you to the, it's not the one that you demoed, it's a slightly different one, but it's also an S3 ransomware event. And so you could try that for free too if you want first, before getting started with it in your own account. But it's usually very, very inexpensive to do. The next question we had was, how is this different from Atomic Red Team?
Yes, I mean, that's a great question. So actually, I covered it in the documentation. But the idea is that Stratus Red Team at least used to be more focused on the endpoints, so they didn't really do cloud. And now, actually, if you look at their implementation of cloud-specific attack techniques, they actually use Stratus Red Team now. So that's basically the difference. Sum up, Atomic Red Team is more applicable to endpoints. So when you are trying to test maybe things like an EDR, and Stratus Red Team is more cloud focused and handles the prerequisites. So it spins up what you need to run the attack, and then it tears it down. While Atomic Red Team, if I'm correct, doesn't. I mean, we can actually have a look at one of their techniques. If I remember correctly, they are written in YAML. And so that's, yes, so they tell you before you want to run that, you need to run these commands, and then you will need to run that to clean it up. So it's kind of up to you to do that. And generally, the cleanup is relatively easy for simple attacks. It can get very tricky when you have things like need an EC2 instance inside a VPC with a NAT gateway, because so many things are, hard to clean up, and you need to handle all the error handling, things like that. That would be the main difference.
One more question before we move on, because then the next question ties directly into Grimoire, which is, are they suitable for incident preparedness training beyond detection engineering?
Absolutely. So it depends what you mean by incident preparedness training, but if the goal is to figure out how you would do an incident response for something, it's a perfect, I mean, I think it's a perfect match. I will say that it also works great when you want to test, hey, is this thing being blocked, for instance, by a service control policy, an SCP in AWS? You will get some errors from Stratus Red Team, but that's totally fine. But I think it's a great match to make sure that you have the right logs in wherever you are sending them, that you have the right alerts, and that you know how to respond to these different attacks.
So
anything you'd like to add?
No, the next question is a perfect segue into the rest of the conversation, which is, how can I fetch the CloudTrail logs for the attacks that were detonated using Stratus Red Team?
Right. So the answer is actually, let's try. So if you want to get the CloudTrail logs for it, so maybe you have a fancy product to do that. The easiest way would be to go to the event history feature of the AWS console. The main issue here is that, so let me remove all the filters. The main issue here is that we have a lot of different events, and that we are not really sure which of these events correspond to the attack, which corresponds to something else, especially when it's a shared sandbox account. So that's the challenge. And thank you for the great segue, Christophe, and I will take it from here. So going back to our slides. Okay, perfect. So what we are doing here is reproducing the attack, and now we're going to move into, well, that's exactly it. How do we observe what happened? And so this might be very different things, like maybe there are your logs, maybe you have a commercial product that maybe has some alerts for your attacks, maybe not. So that's the next stage. And that's really the challenge. So you run the attacks, whether you are using Stratus Red Team or anything else. Maybe you are using the AWS CLI. Maybe you are using another tool like Cloud Katana, which is another open source tool, and you want to see what happens. And the main issue is that, yeah, like there is no easy correlation to get that. So that's why that was a few months ago, released at the occasion of DEF CON, of the DEF CON Cloud Village, a tool that's called Grimoire. Grimoire, which is very hard to pronounce for me, at least in English, so I will just say it the French way. And the idea is that you have Grimoire on the left, and it can help you detonate some attacks in different ways, but we'll see. And along with these attacks, it uses a user agent with a unique ID, which means that in the CloudTrail event history, this UID is going to show up. So the second step it's going to do is polling CloudTrail and checking to see which are the events that are using this UID. So it's quite simple in terms of design. I find it very helpful when you want to find logs without leaving your terminal. So as a quick demo, I'm going to use another attack technique, but let's have a look at the binary and at the repo first. So open Grimoire. Perfect. So you can install it also relatively easily. The idea, I mean, I like to call it a REPL for detection engineering because the idea is it will not leave your terminal if you don't have to. It works, so it can detonate attack techniques in two different ways using Stratus Red Team, if what you want to test is in Stratus Red Team, or you can also use the AWS CLI. So let's give it a try. So if you run the Grimoire command, you will see it has two things, shell and Stratus Red Team. And if you look the help for that, you can see it asks you for an attack technique. So what does it need to run? So let's go back to the Stratus Red Team documentation. And I'm going to take one that's a bit different, maybe the one that creates an admin IAM user. That's something that attackers very often do. They compromise some credentials and they want to keep their access, so they create a new IAM user with admin permissions. I'm going to pass that to Grimoire, and this is going to tell it, hey, run this attack, and then show me the logs that you will get from that in CloudTrail with this correlation. So it will not show anything else than the logs created as a result of this attack. And I'm going to output that, my standard output. So again, what's going to happen here is that under the hood, Grimoire uses Stratus Red Team to run the attack. And then it's going to poll for CloudTrail events. So there is a AWS API for it. I think it's called lookup events. Fetches that, and it's going to show you only the ones that have this randomly generated UID in the user agent. Now, the trick for the demo is that CloudTrail logs take anywhere from 1 minute to 10 to get in. So do we have any Q&A in the chat?
We do. We've got a question that came in, and I can start by answering that one if you want. So it's the question is, can you change something if the client uses Identity Center? So I'm assuming they're referring to, instead of using an access key through an IAM user or something like that, can you use credentials through Identity Center to be able to run these tools? And the answer is yes. You can get temporary credentials from Identity Center. You just go into your start URL, for example. You can also do it from the CLI, but if you want the GUI, you can go through your start URL, and then you can click on the role permission set you're trying to assume. You'll click on that, and it'll display some temporary credentials. You can grab those temporary credentials, just feed them into your CLI, configure your CLI, and then it will just use those same credentials the same way it would use your IAM access key and secret key.
Right, and basically, Grimoire and Stratus Red Team, they use the AWS SDK, so whatever works with the AWS CLI will work here. So you can use the AWS CLI, you can use AWS Vault, anything that is generally supported by AWS will work as well. And while this loads, because it's CloudTrail, so it might take a few minutes. It's also a few weeks before reinvent, so maybe some things are coming up. I will say that there is another mode that you can use, which is the shell mode. And in this mode, instead of using a Stratus Red Team attack technique, you're going to be able to use any tool you like the AWS CLI, to run your attack. So that's the idea. And that would be when you want to test something that Stratus Red Team doesn't necessarily have, because it doesn't have everything and doesn't aim at having all of it. Since this is taking a bit of time, I'm just going to show what this looks like, what this will look like. Oh, okay, it's coming up. So all good. So we can see here it polled CloudTrail, and it found one log, which is I am create access key. And you can see here the exact event from CloudTrail. And these are being streamed as they come in. So here we have another one, attach user policy, where we see that the attacker tried to attach the administrator access policy to the newly created IAM user. And finally, list the access keys and create a new access key. And the order is non-deterministic, just like in CloudTrail. But that's generally how it works. And now I can get into the shell mode. So the Grimoire shell is basically going to tell you, hey, if you press enter, we're going to inject some environment variables in there, which means that when you use the AWS CLI, it's going to automatically get a user agent. So if I press enter, now I'm in a shell that has a few environment variables. One of them is AWS execution env, and this gets automatically picked up by the AWS CLI. So now if I do AWS STS get color identity, and then maybe AWS I am list users, I'm going to type that into devnull. Okay, so let's say that this is the attack that I want to try out. After that, I can just exit this shell, which has been instrumented by Grimoire. And I'm back in the context of Grimoire, and it's going same thing to Paul for CloudTrail events to give me back what's in there. If you want to use any other tool, maybe you want to use curl or something else to call AWS directly, there is a way as well. I think it's in the documentation. So you can just basically use this Grimoire detonation ID to make sure that the correlation ID ends up in your CloudTrail logs. Which is an example where you use AWS curl, which is going to sign the API request to AWS manually to do a describe regions. While this loads, do we have any other question in the chat, Christophe?
No new questions at the moment. So if you have any questions, folks, go ahead and submit them now.
Great. So I will go back to the slides and wrap up a little bit on that. So again, as you can see, there is like a love-hate, mostly love relationship between Grimoire and Stratus Red Team. Mostly because I initially built Grimoire to help with some things in Stratus Red Team, which is if you go to the detection portion of Stratus Red Team, we were trying to show, okay, if you run this attack, what do you get in terms of logs? And one way is to do it manually, but the thing is that the format of CloudTrail logs can change at any time without any notice. It's also a bit painful if you want to anonymize what you show because you don't necessarily want to show, the IPs or the account ID of your testing environment. So we were trying to find a way to automate it. And so now we are using Grimoire to auto-generate the logs for these attacks. And there is a detection, there's a new section that's called detonation logs, which for each of the attacks is going to show you, okay, we actually ran that into a cloud environment. We actually retrieve the CloudTrail logs, and these are the events that you will see, and these are the actual logs that you will get. And the interest here is that if you want to test that in your SIEM, or if you want to throw that into any of your pipelines, well, you can basically just copy paste it and send that, and you will get a very easy way of trying out SIEM. A second thing, these are also anonymized, so that's why you will see some weird things like the region being CA north south to R. So that's the idea. I will say that if you ever contribute to Stratus Red Team, there is some docs on how to use Grimoire to generate these logs. Back to the demo, you can see here that I was in my cloud, in my Grimoire shell. And after doing these things, it shows that it found these events in CloudTrail that indeed correspond to my two CLI commands that I run. So overall, I think it's a handy way to see what happens when you do stuff on AWS, whether manually or with a tool, without leaving your terminal or without having to switch between many tools. It can also be used as a Go library for different usages. Wrapping up a little bit, and I think we're getting to the end of the presentation, and hopefully we'll have more time for Q&A. So there is this lab that I think, Christophe, you introduced already, but do you want to say a few words on how it works?
Definitely, yes. So let me go ahead and share screen again here. So a couple of things that I would add. The first that I would add is the documentation is really well made, very simple, very straightforward. So if you're interested in trying this out after this presentation, you can just go to the respective documentations for both tools, get started within a few minutes. It's very straightforward, which I love. But if you want a little bit more, whoops, where'd my screen go? If you want a little bit more help or breakdown, or if you want like a slower version of this presentation where I had more time to kind of go through step by step, we have these labs that you can try out for free. So you can go to that link that we have in the presentation. I'll pull back in just a minute. You can create a free account, and then all you have to do is click on Start Lab. It'll give you back an access key and secret access key ID and secret access key you can use to configure your CLI. And then we'll have the steps listed out below. So this is for a specific attack technique. We have a couple other attack techniques, planning on adding support for others as well. A few others. Right now, it's primarily S3. So we kind of walk you through step by step. Here's how you do it. Here's how you use this lab environment in order to launch this attack technique. We don't have the CloudTrail side yet, so we don't currently have support for Grimoire, but I'm hoping to be able to launch that over the next few months here. So this is just a great way to get your hands dirty with the tool, to try it out in our environments before you do it in your own environments. However, I would recommend actually running this in your own environments as well. So hopefully this presentation helped you a little bit with that, but we also have these 2 videos on YouTube for free that you can access. The first one here is called Automated Attack Simulation in AWS for Red Teaming. That's focused on Stratus Red Team. So basically the first half of what Christophe showed us today. But again, I could go a little bit slower. We had a little bit more time. So it's really a step-by-step guide. And then the second one is going to be focused on Grimoire and using it with both Stratus Red Team and also with the AWS CLI. And also, if you're creating some sort of bash script or something like that, where you're getting all those CLI commands, you put them in a script, you can run that through Grimoire as well. And we showed that in this video too. So 2 videos I would recommend as a follow-up lab as well. There's also an article that I would recommend because I want to try and contribute to both tools at some point, but I'm not a Go developer. I've never actually done anything substantial with Go. So I came across this article here by Katie, I believe it's Knowles, that has contributed to Stratus Red Team. I believe they launched the entire Entra ID attack techniques and everything. So they've done some significant contributions to Stratus Red Team, and they kind of walk you through how to get familiar with it, with the source code, stuff like that. So I've gone through this article a couple of times. I'm working up the courage to contribute something to Stratus. Hopefully I could do that over the next few months here, but that's the other resource that I would highly recommend checking out. Let's see, did I forget anything else? I think I was going to mention one more thing. No, I believe that was it. So yeah, you can go to this URL right here to get access to it. And then there's also the cheat sheet there if you just want that quick reference guide for both Stratus and Grimoire. We have another cheat sheet. In fact, we have a bunch of cheat sheets. There's another one that compares Atomic Red Team with Stratus. We kind of covered that already earlier, but Stratus is going to be a lot more focused on the cloud TTPs. But of course, I would also recommend checking out Atomic Red Team. That's another really good tool. Let's see what else.
Great. And yeah, I mean, if I can just add on that, unless you have other things you want to show.
Go for it.
Cool. So a few things. If you go to the README, you will see also all the different blog posts and videos and talks that people have done around the tool. The goal is mostly that I know if you like to learn for using a talk or a video or blog post, well, you have the different ways of doing that. So we actually even have one paper, a few talks. Another thing is that if you want to contribute, so as Christophe said, there is this great guide by Katie, which is actually a colleague of mine. And if you want to contribute, there are different ways to contribute. So obviously you can add some new attack techniques, but if you go to the issues tab and you filter on the good first issue tab, there are also a few things which are tagged with research. And the idea here is to say, okay, this is a report of something that happened in the wild. Do we have coverage for it in Stratus Red Team? If not, would it make sense to add it and how? So you don't even need to write code. If you're interested to write code, the best way is to first open an issue to discuss having a new attack technique. there is a philosophy behind it, which is, I think it's probably in the user guide, and the idea is, yes, the idea is to say we don't try to have all the attack techniques. We try to have the ones that are valuable and actionable. What I mean by that is it should be plausible or actual attacker behavior. Otherwise, we could try to do all the theoretical attacks in the world. It's not really helping anyone. And trying to be actionable for detection engineering. So if we say, hey, this is the attack, but there is no way of detecting that, maybe it's not super useful. Now, if you're interested to look at the detection roadmap, you can click here on the projects, and there is an open roadmap. So you can see here the ones that are that has been triaged. So these are the ones that we actively want to work on, and if someone wants to pick it up, they are free to do so. Generally, we prioritize the ones that have been seen in the wild. And if you go back to the issues and you filter on this tag, seen in the wild, you will see all the issues that corresponds to attacks that have been documented to be used in the wild. So obviously, if they are being used by attackers, it makes sense to have them in Stratus Red Team. I think that's mostly it for me. If you have any questions, or if you want to chat about anything on that tool or any contributions, I'm on LinkedIn, even though that's not the right link. And I'm also on Blue Sky, like everyone these days. So that's mostly it for me.
I have a quick question while we wait to see if any other questions trickle in. So if you're looking at something like, so if you want to use Grimoire, let's say with another tool, CloudGoat, right? You want to run a CloudGoat simulation. Is that currently a possibility if you do a couple things behind the scenes, or is that something where we would have to add in that functionality to be able to plug in a different tool like that?
Yeah. So CloudGoat is really a tool. It's a collection of scenarios that you can deploy with Terraform, and then you can basically hack them to learn about AWS hacking. So to some extent, you could use something like Grimoire. The main issue is that you need to make sure that when you run the attacks, you propagate this unique ID in the user agent. So that's quite easy if you are only using the AWS CLI. Sometimes you have to hack into an EC2 instance and then run some commands from there, which will end up in CloudTrail. So it starts to be a bit more involved. Generally, I would say the simpler the attack is, and when it's only a control plane attack, it shouldn't be an issue. When you are mixing up a control plane attack, so like listing files from an S3 bucket, and more of a data plane attack, so compromising an application that runs on an EC2 and then pivoting back to the control plane. Maybe from that EC2, you're going to use that role that's assigned to the EC2 to do stuff. Then it starts to become a bit error prone, and you might miss some things. So one way of dealing with that is to deploy to deploy the CloudGoat scenario in your account, wait for a few minutes, and then make sure that there's nothing else in the account, do your attack, and based on the time that you are running the attack, look at what you have in your logs. It will come with some noise, but there is no silver bullet.
Yeah, because I love the idea of being able to inject that UU idea for either different tools or different scenarios. I mean, even as you were talking, I was thinking about the potential for adding that into Cyber Hands-On Labs, where if we want to be able to provide some CloudTrail logs, I can't necessarily give full access, right? Because you might have a delay of 15 minutes where another customer's information comes into that. So that's where it gets tricky to try and provide that to learners. But if I had a way to just pull those specific UUIDs, since there's not really any access control beyond that that I know of anyway, that could be very interesting. So I'm brainstorming out loud here, but I love the idea of being able to attach that ID to specific commands streaming through CloudTrail. Any questions? Any other questions we've got coming in? Any last minute things?
I don't think we have anything yet, but on this lab thing, technically, if it's a lab environment that you control, you can very well add some kind of proxy or an Nginx reverse proxy on top of it, and inject the user agent that you need in the learning environment. Like by intercepting the request going to the AWS APIs. It starts to be a bit heavy, but that's be one way of doing it.
I'm taking notes here. That's helpful.
Great. So I don't think we have any more questions. Again, I will post my contact information in the chat, or you can just type my name on Google. Feel free to reach out if you want to chat about anything that's related to that tool, to that project, or anything in detection engineering or security in general. I'll be happy to chat.
So as we wrap up, since I'm not seeing more questions, definitely take him up on that. That's a great offer to have. But a final quick question here is, if somebody's listening and maybe they're interested or they're inspired by the tools that you've created and they want to maybe create their own open source security tools that are related to cloud specifically, like how to follow your footsteps of doing this, how did you get started beyond just, hey, I have an idea for this tool, now how do I implement that, especially if you said you didn't know go before this? Like, can you just briefly walk us through that process from A to Z?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it would be the same answer as what you do when you start a new company. And generally, what I mean by that is you have to make sure you are solving a real problem. If it's a problem you solve for yourself, it's likely that other people have the same issue. It's a good start. You have to make sure that you can fail fast, which means that it's better to have something that's not perfect, but that's out relatively quickly, but you can get some feedback and see if people find it useful. And if yes, you can put more work into it. As an example, the first version of Stratus Red Team was written in Python. It was not working very well because the bindings for Terraform are not available in Python, so it was very unreliable. And so I'm very happy that I didn't spend 3 months working on that. And the third thing would be, if you want to write a new tool, people are generally very happy to try them out and to give some feedback, especially if you ask for people in the field, like, hey, I'm trying to work on this tool that is supposed to solve this problem. Generally, they will be very happy to walk you through how they are trying to solve this, or if they are having the same issues. And sometimes you might fall into, you might find some tools that are somewhat the same as what you're trying to do, but they are actually not filling that niche that you're trying to solve.
And I was asking that question really for myself too. So hopefully somebody else got value out of it. But that's definitely something I'm interested as well. So thank you for breaking that down. I've got the final slideshow there where I was looking for the correct URL to the LinkedIn for Christophe there. So you can grab his URL there, or you can also just search for the name. It's a very unique name, so it should be the first one that pulls up. But thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I hope this was helpful. If you have any last minute questions, I'll kind of hang out here for a bit and you can go ahead and ask them. But Christophe, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you scheduling this and making this happen, especially because I know this is a busy time of year for everybody. So thank you for taking the time and thanks for putting this together. I really enjoyed it personally.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Same. Thanks a lot for having me, and have a nice day or evening, depending on where you are.
Likewise. Thank you, Christophe. I'll hang around just for a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, let me know, but you can feel free to hop off.